And I think about this sometimes is like, and this is a little bit off topic, but hopefully still on point. But a lot of people I think are like, we don't want to see LGBT people in our community. We don't want them around our kids. Okay, just like taking that like small pinpoint. 40, 50 years ago, would even the most diehard Minnesota Vikings fan want their kid around Justin Jefferson? They
Right.
would probably have a different opinion. But now it's like, oh, I would love for my kids to be at like a camp with Justin Jefferson. I would love his autograph. I would love all these things. They are this what changed? What changed 50 years ago? Ah, okay, but that's a whole different conversation. But we now see Justin Jefferson as a person, yet it's also there's a whole other conversation on like why we now see him as a person. But then
Right.
it's like, why can't we also champion and elevate people of LGBT communities, trans communities to like advocate for themselves and just be who they are and have conversations with them and probably be surprised that wow, you're not much more different than me. Whether it's like your prejudice are coming from your insecurities, your prejudice are coming from your faith, those can all be challenged a little bit without completely challenging what's inside yourself. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be trans to understand someone who's trans. You also don't have to understand someone to hold compassion and love for someone. And I think
Yeah.
that is the bottom line, is compassion over comprehension. I will say that like time and time again. It's like,
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Stable Cyclist Podcast. My name is JP, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. My friend Joshua Strong is here with me as well, but before we get into our conversation, a few housekeeping items. If you're new here on the Stable Cyclist Podcast, we are very much about bikes, mentality in life, and also 100% about mental health when the occasion arises. We just finished up 5 weeks in a row in the month of May with guests dedicated to Mental Health Awareness Month, and we had some incredible guests, including Dr. Sam Rockwater, Dr. Beth Peter, U.S. National Champ Kelly Catali, and an Ask JP Anything episode that dove deep into my personal battle with bipolar disorder. And you can find all of those episodes in the backlog on YouTube and on the regular Stable Cyclist podcast platforms. We have another Ask JP Anything episode coming up, and some questions have already started to trickle in. And if you have questions for an upcoming Ask JP Anything, you can send me a DM on Instagram at The Stable Cyclist, or you can send an email to thestablecyclist@gmail.com. This episode, of course, is brought to you by Flow Formulas. If you are training for a race or you're just training to be healthy and you want to feel your best on the bike, then Flow Formulas Endurance Mix and Recovery Mix are for you. And you can use the code JohnPeter15 at checkout on your next order. One of the biggest ways you can help us continue to grow the podcast and help more people find the episodes is by sharing episodes directly with friends. If you enjoy today's episode, for example, you could pass it along to someone who you think it would benefit, or you can share it on social media, snap that screenshot, and post it to your story, and be sure to tag us along the way so that we can be in on the fun as well. All right, enough of all that. Let's get Joshua Strong into the studio. Well, Joshua Strong, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's summertime now for me here. So, yeah, it is really good to see you. It is really good to hear your voice and talk to you and just kind of dig into your life today on the podcast. And I just want to get started kind of where we always do, and that is you are, to me, most well known as a photographer and as a bike racer and as a advocate. But I want to start with the photography portion because I think it kind of drives where the story is going to go here. And so I remember meeting you in the middle of the pandemic out in Bismarck, North Dakota, and you were this shy, kind worker working on bikes at 701 Sport and Cycles as I came in to get a new bike of my own. And A, how did you get there? And then how do we get from there to where you are in Denver and all these other places in between? So this is kind of like, I guess Nick Ybarra called it the zero to hero story. But
Yeah.
yeah, where do we go here?
Yeah. So yeah, it's like how much time do you have sort of thing. But I ended up in North Dakota, first of all, by way of the Air Force. I was stationed in Minot Air Force Base for 4 years. And yeah, all 4 years in North Dakota, I joined partially to see the world, partially because I had ambitions to become a pilot. And the Air Force was like, cool, you want to see the world? We'll show you North Dakota. And as a kid from the Southwest in Phoenix, Arizona. I guess that was a stark contrast that I did need to see, um, and happy for all those experiences there. And got out of the Air Force, stayed around at Minot State for a bit to study multimedia. Basically, kind of where the photography journey starts there. I originally was kind of interested in photojournalism, and I think that's kind of where my storytelling shows in my work. But I slowly and slowly drifted more and more away from the writing aspect and more the visual aspect, and dabbled in a few other different things, graphic design, video, ended up working for KMOT and Minot as like a production assistant and then videographer. So got a lot of just Minot State being such a small school, and if you had ambition and drive, you could really put yourself in the driver's seat. I got to do everything from I was a student and the social media assistant at the college. At one point, I dabbled in so many different things that really drove me to be such a multimedia whiz for a while. And then I dropped out and took this opportunity to go to Africa to help my friend with some videography and social media work over there. Came back to my full storage unit and was like, what now? Um, and ended up working as a park ranger slash park attendant is probably a more clear term to use at Fort Stevenson. So working my way south very slowly. Uh, did that for a few months and then did not particularly like it, and wanted to do something photo or bike related, and had the epiphany of enjoying some visits to 701 when I was in Bismarck. So applied for that, got the job, went over there and wrenched for a bit. And then just by happenstance, North Dakota State finds my art portfolio and recruits me into a job. So I leave 701, go do some creative graphic design work for the Bison over in Fargo. And 6, 7 months into that, Kansas State Athletics finds my portfolio, who apparently keeps kind of close tabs. There's kind of like a pipeline, I guess,
Yep.
both by football coach and creative media, I guess, from Fargo to Manhattan, Kansas. And I joined that pipeline, was recruited into a creative director role, couldn't pass it up. Um, and so went down to create things for the Big 12. And that's where things started to really shake up. Took my camera to Unbound because you can't not, only like an hour and a half away from Emporia. And as soon as I put my lens on some lifetime Grand Prix athletes, I knew I was in trouble because I started really enjoying that. Took my camera to Leadville, Steamboat, etc., and the rest is really history. I finished out my contract with Kansas State, went full gas, full tilt, freelance, moved to Denver because where else a better place to kind of base yourself in endurance sport, without being specifically in the Boulder bubble. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's been kind of just flowing and gunning from there.
So I have two questions that pop into mind. The first one is, how did people, you say by happenstance they found your art portfolio. What
Mhm.
does that mean? Did you have it somewhere, just like were you on, just have it on LinkedIn or something, or how did they find it?
So there was this old Twitter sports media page. I'm blanking on the name, but it was like this conglomerate of all these collegiate sports creatives. And I think before I left for Africa, they had this like spreadsheet. They were like, add your info here, your Instagram handles, your website, and like we're gonna blast this list across all the like sports directors in the scene and try to get people who are either recently graduating or freelance or free agents of sorts to like get jobs. And I was like, sure, yeah, like whatever. Like I hope to be graduating Minot State in like a year. And then I ended up dropping out anyway and going kind of freelance. Uh, um, Controversial take on a college degree in the industry, potentially later, but
Don't worry about
I
it.
I just got on that list and honestly forgot about it. I literally just was like, I honestly kind of just put my head down at 701 and I was like, I kind of committed in my head, to be honest, to wrenching bikes. And I was like, maybe this is going to be something. I did bring my camera to a few of the like cyclocross events that 701 put on. And I was like, this should get me in bikes somehow. And so I literally was just literally physically head down, wrenching bikes. And then, yeah, I got an email from North Dakota State and asked them later about it. And yeah, they found me on this spreadsheet because they literally just filtered it by like who's
Yeah.
closest. Because for Fargo, North Dakota, it's going to be hard to recruit creatives from, let's say, Florida, California, etc. So they literally just were like, who's closest? And little do they know, there's this creative who I think it still had me listed in Minot, North Dakota, and they were like, perfect. So yeah, just
That's
happened
that
to be one of the, hopefully, I would say, most talented individuals in near vicinity.
that's fantastic. Also, when you say, "Oh, I took pictures at all these 701 races," I owe you credits in the Madahe film because a couple pictures that people gave me, and I was are these yours or like who do I need to credit? And everybody's like, "No, it's fine." And now I'm like, "No, I know for a fact they were yours." So I apologize
No,
that you.
totally fine.
But if you watch the Madahe film and see pictures with Tyler and his son Ryder cruising around, I know for a fact
Oh
that those
yeah,
are your photos. So
definitely.
my other question though was you said I do freelance stuff now for races. What does that look like? Because I think some people have an idea of what freelance is in their head. If it's a reporter, they're writing and then just maybe hoping to get picked up. What does that look like in the art world, Joshua, especially in photography when you're doing freelance stuff?
Yeah, it can look a lot of different ways. On occasion, I will work for an event, and that will look like a wide scope of work of capturing, all the different categories or the branding, the sponsors. I've typically have worked for smaller events, like smaller gravel events. It's usually an easier scope of work to do that versus
Sure.
bigger events like Lifetime usually have their own staff
Yeah.
photographers, etc. Um, so at the bigger ones, it's usually working for clients and usually multiple clients. It kind of depends. Like I know there are some photographers in the space that have really strong connections with really big brands, and maybe they're working for one or two. But in some cases, I've had to string four, five, six clients together just to make an actual income because some of the smaller brands that were picking me up, especially when I was newer, had smaller budgets. So to
Right.
make the trip affordable or even break even, it was usually getting a few of those. That starts to get tricky though, because the further you spread yourself thin along the peloton, the harder it is to capture. That's been a lesson learned in some ways for me. Um, Not just from its like actual tangibility, but just like getting to the end of an event and just like catching my breath, like, oh my gosh, I had to like get to all these different spots. It's much easier to kind of filter down who you're working for. But yeah, there's like a group of us. I don't know how many you would say, but we're all usually a group of us are at most of the big events, and we're all kind of interchanging who we're working for. It's kind of funny to see it all shift. Like sometimes a client that one person was working for last year, like someone else might be working for them, and we kind of move around. But for some of the big brands, their people kind of keep a tenure. There's some
Sure.
photographers out there. I've been working for, say, Specialized for 2, 3 years, etc. So, yeah,
In that group of, sorry, I'm going to dig into this a little more
yeah.
because I'm curious. In that group of people that you're kind of rolling with in the freelance world, I know I have heard stories when they talk about like the freelance journalists at the Tour de France, like, hey, I'm looking for picture X and I didn't get it. Did you get it? Is there, and there's some swapping of stuff. Does that happen in your group as well? Or are you artistically shooting things in such a way that it's not capable of doing that as much?
Um, I think all of us have, I mean, every photographer has a different voice with their art.
Yeah.
Um, the creative voice, like each of us kind of captures things in a certain way, that's unique, that I would say sometimes plays a role in brands. Like sometimes a brand is going to approach me because they see how I approach my work, and that might
Yeah.
be different than, say, person X approaches their work. Sometimes I would say brands, it doesn't matter. They just do need the content. Um, and it maybe matters more in the like commercial shoots where they're like, shooting the brand and it's more creative direction. Um, as for collaboration, I would say I wish there was more,
Mm.
because a lot of times we're at Unbound, you look around and it's like all 15 of us are at the one spot. And I'm like, this sometimes feels like such a drag, because it's like we could probably all get an equal paycheck if we all somehow, this is a hot take too, but like almost like unionized, like,
Yep.
and said, all right, we're all just going to shoot the event. We cut our workload in half, because maybe we each go to 2 spots. We cover the entire course and we sell those images to everyone at like a flat rate. Now we control like the cost metric, the profit metric for us, and also our workload, because a lot of us were like, we're zooming around in the Jeeps, we're trying to get all this work accomplished, when it's like we could all, I don't even know if like if it's even like a few different agencies, like maybe all 15 of us can't all work for the same person. But
Right.
sometimes I feel like I don't know how to start this. I've had conversations with some people in like the Meteor Cafe at Bentonville when we're all tired and having a beer after Big Sugar. We've had some radical decisions or conversations around this, but yeah, I would love to see more collaboration, because it's not often. I think um, I even have had instances where I didn't get enough material for clients, and the client just went ahead and found someone else. Like it
Mm.
wasn't like I got to control that and be like, oh no, I probably could have asked my friends, but then it gets kind of complicated with like,
Right.
okay, how much of my cut are you going to take, and all
Yeah.
those things, versus, I mean, in this case, the brand was just like, you didn't get enough for us. We found someone else, and they made those decisions for me and cut my rate for me. So, um,
Right.
but yeah, I really wish there was more collaboration. I don't know how to start that conversation other than just keep bringing it up and maybe change things eventually. But
Yeah. So you're not just a photographer though. You do race bikes. You still love
yes.
cycling, not just as something to watch or to take in the drama, but to partake in. And tell us about that passion. Like where did that start and why do you like riding and racing bikes so much?
Oh, yes. I love this question. So growing up in Phoenix, I loved riding my bike even since I was a kid. It was so liberating. I grew up in kind of like a strict household. My dad was very like academics, academics, academics. Um, and I didn't really get into sports really. Tried track and field for a bit, was not much of a runner. And ever since training wheels came off, I loved riding my bike. My dad often would sit in the driveway, and when I was super little, it was like you could go from this cactus to this cactus, and then it eventually became to the end of the block, and then eventually like was to the next stop sign. And my little brother also like followed suit, so he was like usually like one step below me, or sometimes my dad would let me take my brother out to the park. Um, and eventually I unlocked, the whole block. And then eventually it was like, you can just go. My dad was like, just go. And it was so liberating. It was just the best way for me to get outside. I loved it. I became super obsessed with the Tour de France. And I remember occasionally telling my dad, like, I'm going to be there, like, watch me. Um, and, probably got the eye roll from him and it's like, okay, cool, like, go ace your test. Like, um, and so I did very well academically. I got a merit scholarship to Northern Arizona University, and yeah, went up there and took my clunky single speed, probably 40-pound bike over to, like, my very first priority was find out where the cycling club meeting is, get to the first one, get on the team. And so I ride over there. I, funny enough, crash as I pull up. So great first impression. And I walk up to the kids and I'm like, I'm here to, like, sign up. Like, I want to be on the cycling team. And they're like, haha, like, here's your dues. And I'm like, dues? Like, there's no, and in my head, I'm thinking there's no way I can, like, prove myself. Like, I don't have money. I didn't come from a financially, like, expressive family.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I only afford this college because I worked my butt off to prove that I could go to college on merit. So I'm like, where's the merit scholarship for the cycling team? And they kind of, I didn't say that, but I mean, they laughed at me, like, wanting to be on the team and obviously not pay dues, not have my own carbon fiber bike, not have this. And
Yeah.
I think back to that moment, as a diverse person, I'm standing in front of a bunch of white rich kids, to be
Yeah.
frank, and
Yeah.
I'm like, if any one of them, especially the team captains, had just thought about how they could make access to the sport, it just, even if you just want to take it from the competitive lens, like, we want to beat Arizona State, we want to beat U of A, we want to beat all of the teams, let's get the fastest kids on bikes. And looking at me, I'm riding my 40-pound single speed up all the hills in Flagstaff at 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet. And I still to this day sometimes think I couldn't keep up with 18-year-old me. Um, if they would have just, like, thought of, like, let's give a merit chance, like tryouts or something, and, like, sponsor me to be like, let's give them a borrowed bike, let's get them racing. Like, I feel like it's one of those moments. I don't live with regrets, but it's one of those moments that I think, wow, what if there was just a different switch there that probably
Yeah.
could have enabled me to be, who knows, I could be in the Lifetime Grand Prix right now because I was so driven. I was so
Yeah.
like, give me a bike, give me a 20-pound bike, let me show what I can do. Was so willing to learn, and unfortunately, that opportunity got passed up, out of my control. But yeah, eventually, fast forward to the Air Force, I finally afford my own specialized LA, and the rest is history. Kind of on and off hiatuses with racing and stuff, but then 701 brought it back again. Kind of went on another hiatus when I went back into college sports, and then Unbound brought it back again, and now I'm really getting after it, even though it's a little too late. I'm 29 now, but it's fine.
I've, bro, I turned 42 like the day after this comes out, so you're just fine.
Well,
I do want to go back to that Northern Arizona story though, because like that makes my heart hurt, because I think there are so many stories just like that,
mhm.
and there are going to be, spoiler alert for the rest of our conversation, there are going to be a lot of times to sit on stories and reflect today and
Mhm.
hear things that maybe make us a little uncomfortable, or should at least make us pause and be like, yeah, I don't want to ever be that person that
Yep.
prevents somebody else from participating just because they don't look the part, or they don't, you know. I think about, for me, as a, and this is going to just speak to my privilege completely, but like, I think about one of the more vulnerable moments early on in my life was going to my first race, and you're there and you're practically naked in your spandex, and everybody's in their fancy bikes, and you just feel judged to begin with. And then I think about being put in that situation where you know your bike isn't nice enough, and you know you don't look like everybody else, and then they tell you you're not, like, it's, you don't have what it takes to be here, just purely on a decision, not on actually seeing what it takes. And so yeah, I just think that's so powerful, and I didn't want to like rip through into the next part of this without acknowledging, like, that's really crappy, man. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's not even limited to race. I mean, there's so many diverse ways
Yeah.
in which sometimes the sport by and large can be barriered, and it's unfortunate to see. I mean, I feel like a lot of people just need to maybe make more conscious efforts and conscious reflections to think about how they can and be be more focused on enabling versus like disabling. And I think that starts with just like seeing and welcoming people first, like above their gear, above their
Yeah.
skill level, like um and especially because like I feel like a lot of our complaints are like, oh, the industry's struggling, um budgets are this, budgets are that, and profits are not this. And I'm like, what can we do to fix that? And
Yeah.
that's to really welcome people from the literal ground zero up,
Yeah.
and beyond, like outside of our box. And I think I'm not perfect either. There's probably ways in which I subscribe to it that's not perfect. And I think we all can reflect on like how can we as an industry and as a sport be better.
Yeah. And so much of it just comes to us laying down our insecurities. So much of the time, the reason that we behave in these ways that are off-putting to other people, or that barrier people, our own insecurities are getting in the way. And if we can just like know ahead of time, like, no, like, I gotta put that aside so I can make sure these, whoever else needs to be in the group here can be in the group. That's huge. Right on the front, if we know that ahead of time. So
Yeah. Yeah, we all
okay.
come from the same place too.
Yeah.
I feel like we can all scroll several scrolls down our Instagrams and find pictures of us in the no-show stocks. We can find, the ratty bikes that we all started on. Like we all were there at some point, and I think we sometimes even forget that. Like one of these days I should just like post all my just like old school really bad photos and just be like, reminder, like humble yourself. Like
That is going to transition us. You are, I think, in the cycling world, you got on the map majorly in the last year. You had a second place result at nationals in the non-binary category. And this is the part of the conversation, like, you are here as my friend. I've told you on the front, like, I don't even know how to have this conversation necessarily, but I know we need to have this conversation. And so I want to talk about it, and I don't really know where to start. If we start at nationals, if we start at identifying as transgender, where I don't know, Joshua. So it's yours, man. You lead the way, and I'll ask as questions come up.
oof, I mean, yeah, I guess I don't even know. I don't really know where to start.
I
Yeah.
guess maybe, a question for me would be, I met you 2020, and somewhere between 2020 and last year, I was like, oh, Joshua identifies as transgender.
Hmm.
But I like don't know that I could put a timeline on that, and I don't know where you would really put a timeline on it, because I don't think there was any big like out coming out post, right? That
Yeah. Hmm.
people so like people are just like, oh, okay, now we know. I just remember being like, oh, Joshua identifies as transgender and has moved pronouns to they them. Cool. Let's proceed. So
Yeah.
maybe that helps get the conversation started.
Yeah. So I would say so there was actually technically a coming out post before nationals. I held off because I hadn't told my family uh, anything for, I would say, about probably close to a year and a half, 2 years. I didn't really tell anyone. I kind of flew under the radar as I kind of like even just processed it for myself. And this was something that happened. Honestly, throughout my time in Bismarck and Fargo is where I really started kind of, I guess, exploring that side of myself. And I didn't really tell anyone. I mean, living in North Dakota, just to be blunt, wasn't always a very accepting place for topics in that regard. Um, I luckily had an amazing partnership, now ex-partnership, that kind of facilitated that. It was a very intimate way. I mean, relationships are a very intimate way to like see reflections of yourselves, and we both kind of explored that concept together, which was both liberating and vulnerable, in all those ways. Um, and through that, I really only shared with them for the longest time. Um, and yeah, it wasn't very transparent with my coworkers at 701, wasn't very transparent with my coworkers at North Dakota State, continue on to Kansas State. Never truly felt like now is really my time. I mean, I had close friends, um, like very, very close friends that I kind of confided in. And once I moved to Denver was when I really decided that new connections are going to know me in this light. And I also, by that time, felt very concrete in my decision. Um, I guess not even decision. That feels like an awkward way to phrase it, but my identity as a non-binary person. And I think sometimes it's maybe even important for people that maybe don't know that are listening to define transgender doesn't always mean from binary to binary. I think that's sometimes a
Correct.
common misunderstanding is that sometimes people think probably to be transgender means to go from man to woman or woman to man. But by and large, um, transgender can mean anything along the spectrum. And trans being to transform, or like the Latin, I'm not a grammar whiz by any means to have that conversation, but it means to move laterally, however you want to see it around a spectrum. And so to be non-binary is to also be trans. And I sometimes get flustered or frustrated when people think, oh, maybe like this is a limbo between transformation from man to woman. No, that is not what that means to me. For some people, it might, but there are as many ways to be transgender as there are people in the world. There's also as many ways to be a non-binary person as there are people in the world, and same for man and woman. I mean, being a man for someone could look totally different than the next person over. And I think when we understand that concept, we can maybe have a more compassionate sense of gender roles, gender concept, gender philosophy, um, which feels kind of derailing of the conversation. But
No, you're
uh,
good. You're good.
I to kind of go along my journey, I got to Denver and I at first gave myself, okay, I'm gonna kind of reintroduce myself to all of my close friends. I started setting super strict boundaries. Hey, it's Joshua from now on. It's they, them from now on. I want to practice correcting even the people closest to me. And everyone was super receptive to that. And I also said, okay, new people that meet me will meet me and see me for who I know myself to be now. The hardest part was people not close to me that knew of me, and how to tackle that audience. Not that I owed it to anyone, because I don't believe any transgender person, or really, I mean, you don't owe anyone any explanation of your gender, your sexuality, your faith, none of that. Um, but I also wanted to be seen and heard and identified and referenced to correctly. Um,
Yeah.
but I kind of just held my tongue for a bit until I was building my cyclocross season and I was competing in male categories here in Colorado. Still kind of under the radar, just like I got to do what I got to do to practice and to race. These races don't offer a non-binary category, sure. Um, and so knowing that going into nationals, I was going for the non-binary category, I was like, well, I gotta probably say something. This will be kind of awkward if I just don't say anything and show up. Um, so that also was kind of an interesting proponent for me to be like, well, I'm not going to make that announcement without at least telling my mom and my dad. And
Yeah.
so that not forced, but kind of expedited my timeline. I was kind of taking my time and wading through the water on that one. But yeah, so ended up coming out to my family. And then after that, my dearest friend, Blake, took some phenomenal intimate photos
Yeah.
of me and the trans flag. And I posted that saying, hey, I'm going for nationals. I've been building up this hype. My best friend Devin has been filming these amazing videos. Everyone's getting super excited, and I was like, I want everyone to know what this means exactly because I think I was hinting that it meant something, and probably some people probably gravitated towards obviously complexion as a BIPOC racer, like that's a story within itself. But I'm like, no, there's a lot of ways that I'm diverse, and there's a lot of ways that I'm going for something and trying to make a statement and trying to inspire people even beyond that. And so, yeah, that was a very vulnerable moment, probably the most vulnerable moment I've ever had on social media. But I just went for it.
No, and yeah, it was. I do specifically remember that post, but I was one of those people that in the lead up to that, I had kind of picked up. I'm like, I think
Hmm.
that there's something a little bit that at the time he is trying to tell us without
Hmm.
saying it, and then when you made that post, it was very obvious and clear, and like you said, the photos were beautiful and well done, and then you go and compete. But I want to back up like two steps. That conversation with your parents. If you don't want to talk about it, that's totally fine. How hard was the like amping yourself up that I have to go do this?
Definitely difficult. Even with some of my close friends that I have some friendships that are on 5, 6, 8+ years. And to like for someone to know you so well and then kind of like
Yeah.
shift their perspective
Yeah.
is tough. And then of course your parents like know you since the very, very beginning. That's probably definitely the most intimate way that you can know someone is through parenthood and
Yeah.
childhood. And to say I had like a rock in my stomach and a rock in my heart is an understatement. It's, yeah, even without going into too much detail, just like from I have something I want to talk to you about, and like shaking and ebbing and flowing through that, the mental side of that is definitely not to be underestimated. Um, and yeah, preparing for that was definitely hard. The conversations were a lot easier than I thought they would be.
Mm.
Um, Definitely not totally easy. And
Sure.
still kind of working through the creaks and creases of that as I am still today with friends and people who know me. Like, it's still hard to this day, I feel like, to sometimes correct individuals, to have conversations with individuals, to see me in that light. But it's also such a beauty, that vulnerability and the lessons that both I can take from myself and from other people's perspectives, but hopefully people can take from mine, is truly, truly a treasure and truly a privilege. And that goes for my family, friends, and all of the above.
Absolutely. So you are at this point, you're getting ready to go race cyclocross nationals. It has been a target for you, and you have picked up a sponsor along the way in Bolt Cutter. You may have at this point picked up a couple more sponsors. I don't remember the exact order of
Hmm.
how things happened, but you do go and you compete in the non-binary category, and you get second place. And normally I'd never talk about race results or like how
Hmm.
tell me about the race, because I think it's like not important, but I do think in this case it is important to talk about, because you spoke after the fact about what it meant to you to be doing this, that it was, partially, yes, about you just going and competing, but it was also about advocacy, and it was about opportunity, and conversation starting. And I mean, literally, it's why we're having this, part of the reason we're having this conversation
Hmm.
now. And so I do want to talk about the race and kind of what was going through your mind as you were competing that day.
Oh, so much. That's such a depthy question. I think my biggest goal was, and it's contradictory to some of my fellow trans athlete counterparts, but I'll hit it on the nose right away. It's the USA Cycling's ban of trans women. Um, and that was obviously a hard pill to swallow. And the fallout from that and my decision making on how what I wanted my response to be. For a lot of trans athletes, whether they were trans women or not, decided to boycott and said, "We're not going to show up. We're not going to participate. We're not going to give USAC any more of our money." And I respect fully that decision. And there's so many different ways of resistance in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
And I sat with it for quite some time. And initially, my gut reaction was, you know what, same. Like I'm not gonna do anything USAC. I guess cyclocross is kind of done for me. Even this was still in its like baby form. Like I hadn't even like scheduled my cyclocross season yet. But through more and more thought, I thought more about what showing up could mean, and gravitated more towards that decision. Um, because there's a belief of mine in, yeah, physical resistance through showing up and also just like resistance through joy. Like showing USAC there's still trans athletes here. We're still going to make noise. We're still a competitive category. Like we're still all of these things because when I look at it and I look at who is in charge, and the demographic that is predominantly in charge of this industry, I don't know any science behind this, but I think the response to seeing something in its physical form versus seeing like not seeing something like not seeing registration numbers, like not seeing this like boycott, I think is a little bit more powerful. And I correct, like anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to say that that is a correct statement, but when I think about the race directors, what they see out on that course might sit with them a lot longer than what they never see at all. Because to me, it's like they didn't even know the people that they probably banned. They didn't know they and if they continue to ban, they will never know those people. And so it's like, how can I have a voice here and show out and showcase a voice here? It was priority number one, for my advocacy for the trans women category, as well as even just for the non-binary category, period. I wanted to show that the non-binary category is something that could spur media attention, could spur sponsorships, case in point,
Yeah.
um, and show that it could be a competitive category. Unfortunately, I couldn't force my fellow very competitive non-binary athletes to show up because it was their decision not to. But I can firmly say without a doubt, had all of the people that I know that identify as non-binary and can handle a bike on a CX course shown up, it would have been it was already an entertaining race, but an extremely entertaining category. Because I mean, that's what some of us are there for, is like the the actual endurance. Obviously, like the people performing in it are there for the performance gains and the performance aspect of it, but it's a spectator sport as well. And a lot of people show up, they race their race, and they're also watching the pros on Sunday. But I think with the right steps in place and obviously the right actions that I would believe need to be taken by USAC to make people feel more comfortable at these races, I think the non-binary category could be just as competitive as anything else in its own way. I'm not going to say that like, oh yeah, the non-binary category is going toe to toe with like other athletes. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm saying within itself, it could be a very entertaining and investment worthy space for brands, for spectators of the sport, for fans of the sport. And I wanted to show that step one with racing whoever was there, whoever showed up, and racing my race and racing my competitive level, taking a 20-second hole shot, doing as much as I could to like push as hard as I could to show that this could be a race. And then by happenstance, I'm actually thankful for it. Mechanical worries and troubles make that race blow up.
Right.
And I take second. I didn't even want to go and just get first just because. Like I wanted, in fact, it cost me the win that I of course wanted. I went there to win, I'll be honest. Even though a lot of it was a part of the advocacy, of course I'm there to win. I want the jersey. But it doesn't even happen. And I think that in itself even tells more of a story that I hyped all this prep, all this like preparation. Like we really like everyone who was behind me was like, we I kind of went in with like not maybe a chip on my shoulder, but a extreme confidence. Enough so that I showed it in that first lap, that second lap, and then it didn't even really happen for me. So like
Yeah.
that case in point showed that this is not just this race that can be cast a shadow on and cast aside. Like this is something to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. Joshua, I want to dig into the need for non-binary divisions or for it because you talked a lot about we need this. We need this. We need to be loud for it. We need trans women to have an opportunity to compete as well. Why is it necessary? Because some people might be listening and be like, I don't fully understand the need for all of this. So why do we need why do you advocate so hard for the non-binary divisions?
I think I don't know if there's a pinpoint answer. I want to say something super profound, but I don't even really have it. I mean, it's like
Well, and I was
why
going to tell
like
you, I was going to tell you earlier, like sometimes we do this, and I want people to listening to know this too. Just because I have bipolar and I talk about it a lot doesn't mean I'm an expert on it. Like
mhm,
my experiences are my experiences. Just because Joshua is transgender does not mean he carries the weight of having to be the advocate for all people in the world who identify as transgender, and I want to make sure you know that too in talking with you, that like, hey, your answers are your own.
right.
We're just having a conversation, and don't let that be a burden as we go here.
Yeah. I would say it almost feels like I have to. Like I have this platform, I have
Yeah.
this privilege of sponsors that are willing to invest in me, knowing the cost. I mean, look at the cycling industry, not the most welcoming sport, and I am so grateful for the sponsors behind me. Chamois Butter sponsored both of those videos that went out at nationals about my story, and they have a huge platform. Everyone knows who Chamois Butter is, whether they use it or not, and they choose time and time again to champion diverse stories across the board, from BIPOC to para athletes to non-binary athletes. Extremely thankful for them, extremely thankful for every component that's on my bike. And I have that privilege. Some of it has come from my skills in photography. Some of these brand partnership and deals like
Of
have
course.
I've leaned on my skill to be able to market them. And also another blunt and fact is my diversity as a BIPOC athlete. Like it a lot of my brands, it doesn't feel like a check the box, but in some ways, like that box need to be checked, whether it's just being checked or it's being checked and a lot of my brands are checked and all of my brands are checked and I will say that. Um, and this is another box. The non-binary athlete box is another box that needs to be checked and I feel like oftentimes like do just check boxes when it comes to diversity work. And I think
Yeah.
that sometimes can also lead to both sides of that sword. Like on one side, some people like there's a lot of controversy about diversity hires and DEI being a red flag word now and all these things. And I think it's because in some spaces you witness it as just being a checkbox. No, it's a
Yeah.
checkbox and I am a talented photographer and I'm also BIPOC and I'm also transgender and all of these things. Like we are multifaceted people life is multifaceted. We can't look at it as so black and white. I mean, to be non-binary is to challenge a binary itself. Um, and I think it's so important for events not only just to include the event, because I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that in the industry, and I have a lot of grace for it because I think a lot of event directors might not even just have a non-binary athlete in their life. Um, Case in point, and I want to put a shout out is Bobby Wintle, the event director of the Mid South, has people in his life from so many diverse spheres
Yeah,
that
he does.
it shows in his event and how he includes people in his event. And I don't want to force someone who's maybe making an event in a small town in North Dakota, for example, to like go find a non-binary friend. Like it obviously needs to come by who's in your community and whether or not you have the capacity and the bandwidth to like learn who's in your community, learn who wants to come to your bike races. Like that is just a realistic expectation within itself. But if that exists for you, if you are in Colorado, if you are in some of these places, I mean, honestly, in North Dakota, like you would honestly be surprised the more questions you ask of people. If I was asked more questions when I was in North Dakota about how I wanted to be identified, how I wanted to be referenced to, that unlocks so much. Like I think there's so much beauty and vulnerability with each other to name different things. Like I struggle with this. What about you? I think this. What about you? Instead of just being so worried about how we're apart. I mean, and that could be a rabbit hole conversation for a whole podcast within itself. But to answer your question, I feel like I have to. I feel like I have to use my platform and my privilege as like someone who has worked really hard to build a following in this sport to show out and show forth ways in which we can be better because I want to see a better cycling for tomorrow. And that drives me to the nines.
Yeah, that is a beautiful description from top to bottom, Joshua. I appreciate all of that. I have I want to dive into kind of the mental health piece within the LGBTQ plus community because it is the most underrepresented group when we talk about mental health things in the United States. When I go out and speak, I talk about how mental health does not discriminate whatsoever. It doesn't care if you're black or you're white or if you're male or female or if you don't identify as that. It does not care. It will affect your life one way or another if it wants to. And I constantly, as I look through statistics that I get from NAMI or if I look through the International Bipolar Foundation information that I get, and the top of the list for least represented or least identifying as having problems, or the kind of the group that's underrepresented, is the LGBTQ plus community. And I just want to dig into like why that is, because I don't think a lot of people, like you said, if you don't have somebody in your life that you know of that identifies in that group, you might not have an understanding of why it's such a mental health challenge, or it can be such a mental health challenge. So again, you're not representing all people, but in your experience, why is this an issue?
I think it's because members of the LGBTQ plus community fight for their lives every day, and that's exhausting. Um, the seemingly, and I feel like it's direct and blunt and hit it on the nose and say that the more out someone is, the more that struggle becomes, because a lot of people, and then I would even actually scratch that and leave it in, but scratch that, and I want to say that even the most closeted individuals could also be struggling the most because they don't even get to show their full selves to their community, their family, and those people. So I mean, there's really no comparison there from spectrum to spectrum. And uh, oftentimes I think to the Black community or BIPOC community, because some of the most friction that I've sometimes have felt towards LGBTQ plus community comes sometimes from BIPOC individuals. And that is a whole, I feel like could be a case study in itself. But I sometimes am saddened by that thought because I think of it as like years ago and still to this day, members of Black communities and people of color communities and indigenous communities have been oppressed and have different barriers up to like live their lives truly and fully to themselves and liberate in liberated form. And like each year it feels like we get slowly and slowly closer to further liberations from like the civil rights movement, which was not long ago. Segregation was not long ago, slavery was not long ago, and all of those things are in an equilibrium as far as the spectrum of like how different people face different uh, either oppressive systems or mockery or uh, just like violence. Um, and it's so unfortunate to see that even in fellow communities that struggle with these oppressive systems, that like they are so quick to sometimes shame an adjacent, in my opinion, adjacent struggle. Um, a lot of BIPOC people that I know, Black people that I know, can sometimes be violent or uh, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Prejudice against people from that community, and it's so unfortunate to see because it's like you struggle too, and I am a BIPOC person that is also both all of these things. So like I'm like I mean I'm half white, half black, and then also I'm in between two binaries there. And now I'm in between two binaries in another way in my life. And so, yeah, my lens is very interesting to see the world, I feel like, from top to bottom. But I think it's also from the mental health side back to on point. I feel like when you are struggling with your identity, your expression of self, your belonging in your community, that is so hard. I mean, for people that could relate to maybe a story of going through high school and not fitting in, like and now you're carrying that into your adult life, like you have to hide certain aspects of yourself or you get mocked for certain aspects of yourself or what you wear, who you love, all of these things, and like that is exhausting, and like you can only imagine how that could lead to depression. And I argue that it's a dual-edged sword because on the other side of that, sometimes even the most masculine, male identifying people are also facing oppression from the same systems that kind of empower them. They also like feel like, you know, like I can't pronounce that word, but like fathers like have to be this like certain way, and they're facing their own depressive battles of like this like certain way, this certain like box that they have to form in is not much different, if not different at all, from maybe someone who is in a box that they're being forced into to be like, oh yeah, present straight, be this way, don't identify this way, don't wear this. Like it's so adjacent. And I think so many times we forget just how parallel those struggles are when it comes to mental
Yeah.
health.
Yeah. How would you mentioned community, being in a community with people. How would you advise people of how to build that community and how to make people who are on the outside or on the edges feel more pulled back in? Because I think social media makes us think we should, and we were talking about this before we started recording, social media can make us think, and we're both guilty of it too, like, here's what I am, if you don't like it, unfollow me. But you and I
Hmm.
also both know that doesn't really build community.
No.
And so how would you, from your situation, pull people in who might be different and say, hey, this is how we have to do it, here is the way forward?
I always say pull up a chair, sit down and talk, and apply selfless listening. Because the more you do that, the more you open up vulnerably to another person, could unlock even things in yourself. And I'm not saying that you're going to sit down with like a trans person and be trans by the end of that conversation. And I think that's sometimes, again, going back to leading with insecurities, I think sometimes people will wall off against the queer community because I don't want to be queer. Talking to a queer person, if you see them as an individual first, if you see them as an individual first, that conversation is totally different. Because,
Yeah.
and I think about this sometimes is like, and this is a little bit off topic, but hopefully still on point. But a lot of people I think are like, we don't want to see LGBT people in our community. We don't want them around our kids. Okay, just like taking that like small pinpoint. 40, 50 years ago, would even the most diehard Minnesota Vikings fan want their kid around Justin Jefferson? They
Right.
would probably have a different opinion. But now it's like, oh, I would love for my kids to be at like a camp with Justin Jefferson. I would love his autograph. I would love all these things. They are this what changed? What changed 50 years ago? Ah, okay, but that's a whole different conversation. But we now see Justin Jefferson as a person, yet it's also there's a whole other conversation on like why we now see him as a person. But
Yeah.
then it's like, why can't we also champion and elevate people of LGBT communities, trans communities to like advocate for themselves and just be who they are and have conversations with them and probably be surprised that wow, you're not much more different than me. Whether it's like your prejudice are coming from your insecurities, your prejudice are coming from your faith, those can all be challenged a little bit without completely challenging what's inside yourself. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be trans to understand someone who's trans. You also don't have to understand someone to hold compassion and love for someone. And I think
Yeah.
that is the bottom line, is compassion over comprehension. I will say that like time and time again is like I don't even in all of my advocacy, I'm not looking for comprehension through this
Yeah.
conversation. Even I'm not looking for complete comprehension. I don't need it. I need to sit with myself in my own journal and comprehend myself. We all do, whether we're struggling with our identities or not, but
Yeah.
we can hold compassion for each other. I can, like, I posted that to my story. I'll call myself out. I said, like, either let's have a conversation or unfollow me, which in some ways is a little bit inviting non-community, but I really am just starting to set a boundary where I'm like, if you can't talk to me, then just don't. Like,
Yeah.
why bother? Because we're never going to get anywhere. But if you can at least talk to me, I could sit down with the biggest bigot, homophobic, racist person, and if at least they're willing to sit and talk, I would honestly be so curious
Yeah.
to hear like where does it come from? Like, walk me through your perspective, and I'll selflessly listen. I'll walk you through mine, and I would love to see where we end at the end of the day. You'd probably be crying and hugging, but we don't do that in society. We don't. We are so conscripted to this one side of the wall or the other.
Yeah. We have become very afraid, like you said. And I think the sentence you said, if I sit down with someone who's trans, I'm going to be trans by the end of the conversation. But we are afraid all the time that what we believe will be fully deconstructed by if we sit down and start talking to people who don't feel the way we do. And like, I'm not going to talk about politics because I hate talking about politics, but like, this has been like in the forefront of my mind since about 2016. Just that we have these ideals that we can't sit down and talk. And I live in a like the most progressive small town in maybe northern America, with 50% diversity and all of this. But the chance to sit down and have that conversation with people who still feel way different than I do happens pretty frequently. And I will just tell you and everyone who's listening, it is so rewarding to actually sit down at those kind of community events and talk to those people and truly listen. Why do you think this way? I don't think that way. That's okay. We can still like honor each
Mm,
other. And that is really what you're telling us to do here, Joshua, is that we have to honor people as human beings and just as existing. And it so much of what I do circles back to Mr. Rogers. I have a very Mr. Rogers vibe about how I teach and go about life, but I always think about how he honored people, and he honored people like Francois Clemens, who was openly gay but couldn't be openly gay at the time, and was a black man, and was just like, I love you the way you are. Like, I just love you for who you are, and that's enough. And we need more of that today. And I really hope in our conversation today, Joshua, as I have stumbled through my questions and made this attempt at conversation, that I have honored you. I hope I have. It has been really heavy for me to listen to a lot of it and just feel the hurt for a lot of people that don't get to always see the light, or that feel like they're kind of in the shadows, and that is really unfortunate. But I am so grateful for you coming on the show today and sharing your story, your life, who you are, and helping us kind of unpack some topics that, I'll be totally honest, I didn't have as good of understanding as when we started as I do now. And so I'm grateful for that.
I'm honored to be here, and I think you did great. I think you definitely honored me. I know it's probably heavy, and I hope the audience also takes something out of this for what it's worth. And it's been a great privilege to be here, and I appreciate you letting me elevate my voice and giving me the space to do so.
Yeah, we are going to end on a lighter set of questions today, just because, and this is going to be a new thing moving forward, but I have two questions for you. One is, if you could go ride your bike anywhere in America, we're just going to stick to the United States, where are you going on that bike ride?
Ooh. I really, really have strong aspirations to do the Tour Divide someday. Um, Super inspired by Lael Wilcox and Lachlan Morton.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I want to say I think non-binary individuals have done it. But I think I mean, gender roles and gender things aside, I think it'd just be really cool to do it. But it also would be kind of cool to do it in that context of maybe hopefully inspire um, people of other demographics that haven't gotten that spotlight for that route yet. And so that's, I think, in my future at some point. I think right now I'm in the cyclocross era, and I'll probably eventually want to break from it. So I think the Tour Divide's on my radar, both from that aspect and just also I really, really want to do that route.
I love that you went from like the shortest race possible offered by USAC right now, other than short track mountain bike, and went
Yeah.
to like literally the longest ride in America.
That's honestly how I approach things. I just pulled the plug on going to the Rift, was 120 miles. I don't like
Yep.
that distance. Like I honestly only like 45, 60-minute short course, or I just want to be on my bike for like days on end. I don't like anything in between. Like I could never do Unbound. That's not for me. Like I can't explain it, but I only like obviously the shortest, choppiest, gnarliest way you can ride a drop bar bike, or just a long send.
Fantastic. It all makes sense to me. All right, next fun question. You and I are on a bike ride and we stop at a gas station. What are you getting to eat and drink?
Ooh, E is easy. Haribo Star Mix, if they have it. If not, the gummy bears.
Yep.
I Haribo, if you're listening, sponsor me. I'm so ready. I usually have like I could probably. I'm surprised I don't have any like within reach. Usually at all times, but that's easy. That or a Reese's Fast Break is a go-to. Um, and then drink probably. I feel like it's like the pick me up of champions, but probably a Coke. Um,
Yes.
and probably one of those Gatorade like Pedialyte mix things. I don't know what they're called, but
Right on.
yeah,
Joshua, where can people find you if they do want to follow along with your amazing story?
yeah. On Instagram, I'm at underscore Joshua W Strong or www.joshuawstrong.com.
Fantastic. Well, Joshua, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you. I love you as a friend. I am so glad that you were here with us today. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, honestly, thank you so much for the space. I love you too, and it's been an incredible privilege and honor. I'm so excited for this to get out to the world and hopefully just get some minds turning.
Thank you so much for listening today and for being a part of the conversation between Joshua and me. Do me a favor and reach out to those around you and let them know that you love them, because the heaviness of life is always made lighter when we know we aren't alone. And if you find yourself in the presence of people who are different from what you would consider the norm, I would encourage you to pull that chair up closer and engage. Finally, the Stable Cyclist Podcast is a weekly-ish show focusing on long-form conversation about bikes, mentality, and when the situation is right, we will dive deep into mental health. Episodes will always drop Fridays at midnight on the audio podcast apps, and the video podcast will drop on Friday mornings at 8 a.m. Have an amazing day. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are loved.